We have Pam Conrad with us today. Pam is one of our distinguished visiting professors one couple of years back, and she arrived just now after spending the morning with kids at the St. Michael's Middle High School talking about science. The kids ask great questions. Unfortunately, they're getting ahead of steam, and then they have to break for lunch. But that's kind of the way it goes. But Pam, I'd like to welcome you. It's so nice to have you here, finally, in the flesh. So go ahead and start your program, and I'm going to sit down.
One thing you should tell me before I get going,
Mm-hmm.
how long can I go?
You have an hour and a half.
All right, we'll try to cram in as much as we can.
Can everyone hear okay?
And if we don't get to the answer of a question that you have, I'll give you my email address at the end and you can write to me and I'll try to respond. And if I don't know the answer, I'll find somebody who might. Is that fair? That's why God invented the Apple Watch.
Well, that way you don't have to look, you don't have to look at your watch, nobody will know.
Awesome. So this is a little bit of an aside in the eyes of most people for me, because what I typically have done is space exploration. But because of the strange and wacky connections between all kinds of disciplines, I ended up doing some ocean exploration connected with my NASA work. And I give you all this as a caveat now to just throw in another variable, and that is my full-time job now is I'm an Episcopal priest. So what science I do, I try to cram in the 3 hours that I'm not working my day job. And depending upon what's going on Mars, I may work at night too, because we're working on a mission that is gathering samples that will be collected by another rover at some point in the future. And that mission is going to have an earlier sunset than the last Mars mission I worked on. And so we're rushing around trying to get the work done there before NASA tells us, go take your samples to this site where another rover will come in a bazillion years and collect these samples. So that's just a little context to tell you that there is a reason why I'm interested in the oceans, and I hope that you will feel similarly interested in the oceans. Zoom friends, I won't be able to look at you as much or as well as I would like to, because I'll probably be looking at my slides so I can remember what I'm supposed to be talking about in any given increment. But I will try to pay attention to your questions and repeat questions that are asked in here so that you can hear better. And we will be monitoring for your questions so we can address those too. So, oceans matter, I think you all know that, but why they matter may be not quite as obvious as we think, because there are some nuances, and also there are some things that we can do to help protect oceans as habitat, and some compelling reasons why we should make modifications to our own lives so that we can do whatever small contributions we can do to keep the oceans viable. I'm gonna try just doing this and not using, all right, good. So first I'll tell you, I hate word slides, but I wanted to put some things here so that in case you're a visual learner and you want to see a word, you can make a note or remember it better. The oceans are so important because they're the bulk of the habitat on the Earth. And they are the bulk of the material on the Earth. The problem with the Earth's surface is not that it's divided up into land and ocean, it's that some of the land is under the ocean. And the way that the mineral resources are distributed on the Earth are affected, the ways in which the mineral resources are distributed are affected by the oceans, because the constant hydration, rehydration, and the modification of materials that come from depth, not depth within the ocean, but within the bowels of the Earth, these materials are altered differently if they are underwater than if they are on the land. So we see this in a profound difference between how mechanical weathering changes the surface materials of dry land and how the water acts differently with the high pressure that exists at the bottom of the water column. Why am I telling you this? Because as we attempt to explore other planets and get a handle on whether they could or might not support life, we have to take into consideration the huge impact that the oceans on Earth have left on the habitability of the entire planet. Now, there is a lot of habitable space in the oceans because of the dominant position they play when it comes to habitable environments on the Earth. But the fact of the matter is, even though most of the life on Earth is actually in the oceans, we don't know what most of it is because we have explored comparatively little of the oceans relative to what we have explored on land, and we haven't even explored all the land. We also haven't explored our deep past because the Earth keeps resurfacing itself, subducting older material down beneath the surface, and then we don't get a look at that history. So we can only see back about 3.8 billion years with what is exposed on dry land, and we don't know what came before. We might be able to get a look at our history from looking at Mars, if Mars is a reliable analog to the Earth, but we don't even know that yet. So the oceans is a big unsolved mystery about habitable environments, and the life itself should be high up on our agenda of mysteries to explore. They don't get funded very well, but it is important that we understand them because they have such a profound effect on both the climate and the weather that we experience. And I think by the time we're all sort of late high school age, we all know that the difference between climate and weather sometimes is confusing because we keep hearing the climate is getting warmer, and then we see a foot of snow in some places. And this is because weather is such a short-term event, and climate is a more general condition. And so the perturbations of our daily weather depend on several local things. Even things such as how much ground has been covered up by an impermeable surface. How many buildings do we have that reflect light off of one another, and considerations like that. The Earth is a giant system, and each habitat in the Earth's habitable zones is a smaller system. And these systems, none of them are closed. So things go out of one system and into another where they are worked upon by the components of that system. In the case of living things, what that means essentially is that the poop of one organism becomes the nutrition of another organism, and at a larger scale, alters the Earth materials differently. So the take-home message here is the ocean as a subsystem of the entire Earth has a profound effect on the subsystem of different organisms and their niches on the dry land. And so that is one profound reason to understand them. I believe that there are mysteries that are so profound about the ocean, we should dedicate much more of our intellectual time on the oceans than we do on space, because our immediate future is dependent upon solving some of these, I will come right out and say, threats that disturbing the oceans might challenge us with. So I'm going to be talking about a few things, but because we have a limited time, even though it seems like 90 minutes is a long time, we want to address three really big threats. One of them is a disturbance to something that we call the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Current, or AMOC, of which the Gulf Stream is part. Another one is the overfishing of the oceans, and I might say not only the overfishing, but the illegal overfishing of the oceans. And then the third thing is the anthropogenic pollution that we leave in the oceans. So I'm going to touch on all three of those a little bit, but unfortunately, there are many more mysteries that we could address, and we won't have time to do them all today. That's why I'm going to give you my email address if you want to talk further. So there's a lot of life. I told you, I didn't give you a number, but that's why I put this slide up here. There are about 1 million species of animals living in the ocean. A lot of them are microorganisms, and about 2/3 have never been seen or described. And this is a problem because we don't know what's growing down there. I'm going to talk a little later about an expedition I took a few years ago down to the floor of the Pacific Ocean, brought back some samples, and created practically a riot in my lab because when we did the sequencing of these microorganisms, they were 99.5% match for anthrax. And we had to do mitigation like you never saw before that would make a home mold mitigation look like nothing. And the problem is, because there are a lot of organisms that are 99% similar, even 99.8% similar, the way a human and a dog is. And so something can look like something else, and one might be extremely pathogenic, and the other might be extremely useful as perhaps a pharmaceutical agent. So trying to do pharmaceutical discovery in the Amazon jungle is a much more destructive thing than doing pharmaceutical discovery in the ocean, unless you leave a bunch of bad things in the ocean. So these are design trades that we make when we try to evolve the state of the art of technology, of pharmaceuticals, and of nutrition on Earth. It all, again, is a system. So we don't know what's down there, and we should. The water column, because it's a water column and not a stiff thing, it's fluid and moving around. And so it's very poorly characterized because it's not the same one day as it is the other day. We have a rough idea of the kinds of trends you see from top to bottom, but the chemistry moves around. So it's hard to characterize the water column. We've only done it in a very general way. This Atlantic meridional overturning circulation is the first thing I'm going to focus on because it controls a lot of the processes that we look at in our global climate models. And so as we try to understand the global circulation of the atmosphere and thus the climate, we have to understand the global circulation of the oceans. And I do mean global, and that's what I'm going to show you here, because this is the first big challenge. So I realize that this looks either like a Mobius strip or a taffy making process. And that's a good analogy for it. It's kind of like a conveyor belt that moves warm water in one direction, and then as it cools, that cooler water in another direction. This actually is a dominant factor, not the only one, but a dominant factor in our global climate. The reason why is because we have humans living in latitudes that would normally be much too cold to produce food or to just comfortably live. Since we have become a dominantly agricultural-based food-consuming species, as opposed to the hunter-gatherers that we used to be, this is important. For example, the United Kingdom and Scandinavia would not be very habitable without this current, because what it does is it drives warm water near the surface up along Western Europe, United Kingdom, Scandinavia, and the like. And then, as it hits the cold Arctic waters, it gets more dense and it goes down. And so the warmer water goes down, forcing some colder water up, and you get this overturning. This is important also for fish populations, which seasonally move one place and another. I gave the example to the kids earlier this morning about anchovies. When I asked who likes anchovies on their pizza and who doesn't, the dominant answer was, I like them, but nobody likes the texture. I digress. Anchovies tend to come off the coast of Peru, and when the ocean temperature is disturbed by the disturbance of this AMOC, you don't get the anchovies moving into areas where they can be fished by the various sovereign entities that have claim to fishing rights in those territories. It's a big deal if people can't get their anchovy paste, you can't make a good dressing for a Caesar salad. So there are impacts not only on the climate, but also on our food chain and also on our economy. And that's because we have a very ocean-centric economy as well. We might think it's an energy-producing economy and that oil production and the like are a big economic driver. It is. But when you think about how much of the world exists on food from the ocean, that's really the only place where we are still hunter-gatherers. Because even people who consume meat, that's agriculturally produced meat. Not that we don't also have farms for fish, but most of the fish that humans consume is wild caught. So, why am I bringing this up now? Well, this current has been stable for a very long time. If it's not stable, it's a warning sign that it might be not only disrupted, but that it could stop altogether. It turns out that it has been giving off warning signs that it's becoming unstable as the climate has warmed. Because as the climate warms, we get more intense storms, we get different atmospheric conditions, and part of the atmospheric conditions determine things like how much water can the atmosphere hold when it evaporates from the ocean surface, how much rainfall comes down on the land, and then as runoff, it feeds into rivers and goes emptying itself into the oceans. And so we get a tremendous amount of agricultural chemicals weathered off of the dry land and all of the other things that we discharge into water from industry or even from mining. And so that input of both chemicals and other things, which we're about to talk about, really can also disrupt this AMOC. So there's an important reason to pay attention to this circulation of the oceans because our climate will change dramatically if this thing stops. One of the things that will happen is that.
Good question.
Oh yeah, I couldn't see it.
I'm sorry, when I look at that and I see the way the arrow's going, I think of the Gulf Stream going up along the thing and up and towards the North Sea along our coast. I don't see how that fits into this.
The Gulf Stream?
Yeah.
The Gulf Stream is part of this whole giant conveyor belt. It only refers to that part of it. So I'm showing you the whole current pattern. The Gulf Stream is the part that you just identified.
Okay, but it seems to be going the wrong way, right? I mean, there you have it cold going down along the coast of the US.
So what happens is you get transport both ways. And this is what is so weird. The warm water is going one way on the top and the cold water is going the other way on the bottom. So in terms of how we might be disrupting this as a function of global climate change, I'll tell you exactly how that is. As things melt in the polar regions, they contribute a lot of coal and fresh water too. And that water stops the warmer water there from getting all the way up to where it used to go, and then it cools too quickly and never quite gets to where it was going to go. And so that makes the whole flow turbulent, and you can see this turbulence in different ocean circulation models. And that turbulence is one of the causes that the AMOC is becoming unstable. So, yes,
So that's a relationship between the two, the Gulf Stream.
they're not the two. The Gulf Stream is part of this whole global current pattern. And I used to not get that until I started reading this literature. And they are both, one is small perturbations in the structure of the Gulf Stream itself, and the other is larger perturbations on the whole AMOC. What were you gonna say?
I'm thinking the confusion is because it's showing it closer to England,
Yeah,
but that's just the diagram, it is actually happening.
Subsurface.
it's surface versus subsurface. And the fact of the matter is, what you see is very far off the east coast of North America.
Right.
But you still get warmer waters that are there, but the driving of the circulation. This is just showing you the direction of the circulation. That's right. I'm gonna move this way a little bit so I can see you if you ask another question.
Good point.
So, I already told you about this stuff, so I'm not gonna make you look at more words. So, actually, before I get to this article, let me just say one thing. So when we think about the distribution of temperatures, you know, just like in the zones where we grow different things in our gardens here, depending upon what zone we live in, we grow different stuff. And that level of effect on the habitability of the ocean has its analog in where the fish go and where they live. So colder species, colder loving species want to be in the cooler water and vice versa for the warmer species. And so as you disrupt this whole global water circulation model, you disrupt the placement of fishing. That has reverberation through the economies of places. Stop bothering me. Because, sorry, I can feel my wrist vibrating. Because what happens is certain nations claim certain amounts of coastline as their fishing territory. And so when they cannot produce that food, and when, trying to think of a tactful way to say this, illegal fishing vessels from other sovereign territories sneak in there and use nets, we call them ghost nets, and snatch up all the fish, then you disrupt both the economy of the place who claims that sovereign territory, and you disrupt the ecology. So, but we'll get to that in a minute. Just a couple, yeah, go ahead.
I think it's a simple answer. Do these changes in the AMOC also affect the climate on shore?
Yes,
So that would be one reason why we're no longer zone 7 for plant life, we're zone 8.
I don't think that is the reason right now. That is strictly atmospheric temperature. But you're going in the right direction there, because one of the potential effects of completely destroying the AMOC is that all the coastal areas of the planet will become very different than they are right now. Some will become colder, some will become warmer, and that will affect the species of plants that you presently see. So that's coming, and so here's the punchline. There is a lot of literature to suggest not only has the AMOC become unstable, but that it's going to cease sooner than we thought. I mean, completely stop, until some new oceanic circulation pattern is established. And we used to think it would be stable at least enough to maintain itself through the end of this century. This headline that I have here in this abstract is to tell you that these investigators have done some modeling using the data in a specific place in the water column at a Scandinavian station to determine that not only is the AMOC unstable, but if you fit the curve of how rapidly that temperature is deviating from what it has stably been, it could be within a decade that it goes quiet. And this, of course, will make you have to rethink whether you would like to have oceanfront property. All of us, if we were able to get here today, live in a coastal area. If you're on Zoom, you might be calling in from a place that is less profoundly affected. And we need to think about whether or not we're going to have to deal with climate refugees. That will also affect our agriculture. Where will we produce this, that, or the other thing? And as we begin to think about this, we have to plan differently, and we have to behave differently. Now, this is not meant to be a doom and gloom pitch, but this is meant to show how much everything is all related to everything else. Yes, Lynn?
Have scientists been able to figure out a way of affecting the AMOC?
You mean how we would
Correcting it.
modify it?
Yeah.
I have not delved into any literature like that. I don't know the answer, but geoengineering is really dangerous. And while there have been solutions proposed in how we might modify atmospheric temperature, those are really dangerous and risky. I would be more inclined to accept geoengineering of the atmosphere than I would of the oceans, because there are always unintended consequences when you perturb a system, because we're just not able to think outside of the system in which we exist. And so it's a bad idea. There are things we can do to try to slow down the impact that humans have on the oceans, and we are actually going to talk about those in a minute. But what I wanted to tell you is this is not some pie in the sky distant thing. This is something that is now. In the age of our children and grandchildren, we need to start thinking about this. What these people have modeled is that as early as the 2030s, okay, it's 2024 now, we might be having to deal with this. The effects will look like much colder regions on the east coast of the US, not just places that are obvious like New England, but even down to the mid-Atlantic and probably a little bit below that, maybe as far as South Carolina. And then in Europe, the huge agricultural basis of Western Europe and of the United Kingdom will be disturbed. And so how are we going to feed these people? Something we have to think about. The agricultural output of Ukraine is mostly gone. And that was a major global contributor. So, cheery. Stroke Tuesday, we're all supposed to be wearing beads and eating pancakes. All right, I'm going to go past this because I've already told you all this stuff, or at least a lot of this stuff. I want to talk about my second biggie that I think affects the state of the health of the oceans, and that is what we call dark vessels, because there's a relationship between overfishing and unaccounted for fishing vessels. And when you have both of those things happening, you can't get an accurate view of how much we are overfishing and when to take some steps to limit. We're all familiar with when we have a situation where the blue crab population, there aren't enough females, and they tell us we're going to raise the price of crabs to, like, who knows what it'll be this year, $200 a bushel or something like that. They're trying to put economic pressure because there's a reduced catch. And also we're trying to keep the health of the bay sufficient so that we can continue to enjoy crabs. But there are tons of species of fish that we consume, and non-fish, but other ocean-dwelling organisms, soft-shell organisms, hard-shell organisms. Shellfish is a big industry on our coast. So all of these things are dependent upon not only this appropriate limitations on how much we harvest, but also appropriate limitations on how much stuff we allow to go into their habitat and affect their health, which in turn will affect our health. So it turns out that all fishing vessels have this little identifying transponder. that lets you track where they are. And that's not public information. Usually the shipping companies only know where their fleets are. But there are also many illegal excursions from international waters to coastal waters, or even what we call dark vessels who turn off their transponders even when they're in international waters, so we can't see how much they're taken out of the ocean. And so this team who did this research used artificial intelligence to calculate where these vessels were based upon other disturbances that are observable by satellite imagery and by other techniques. The problem with these dark vessels and overfishing is not only that it disrupts the food chain and the supply for the sovereign nations whose waters are invaded, but the numbers of vessels and what they put into the water is another source of anthropogenic pollution. So advances that allow artificial intelligence to help us predict where things might be happening so that you can then observe whether or not it's true with confirmatory overflights or satellite imagery are extremely valuable. And when we talk about the threat of AI and how we need to be careful about it, we should also talk about the potential benefits to which we could put AI in allowing us to right some wrongs and also to safeguard our environment. And this is one of them. So what is interesting about these dark vessels is that I got this statistic here, 3/4 of fishing vessels worldwide are inaccessible to public scrutiny. That's how many dark vessels there are taking food out of the oceans. And so using this AI, we can now begin to look for them and try to mitigate this. A couple of statistics about this that I found useful that I wrote down for you are that 1 billion people depend upon the sea for their food, and 260 million are employed in marine fishing. So that's a high percent of humans that have fishing-related activity as their commercial basis. 80% of all goods, period, that are traded by sea, and 30% of the world's oil being produced offshore creates other use of the ocean. And when we use that ocean that way, as I said earlier, we put other pollutants into the ocean. Anybody here sail or motor in the bay? So, what do you do with your bilge?
Feed fish.
Yeah. We add to the nitrogen repository. So, some stuff you're supposed to pump out at your marina, but most water products go straight into the bay because a lot of people just do that. And the larger vessels is even more of a problem, especially if they're dark vessels, then we don't know. So that's an issue. 1/3 of fish stocks are operated beyond sustainability. So that means 33% of the fish species that we want to consume, we are overfishing. That's a big percentage. And 30 to 50% of critical habitats for these fish species, and I include shellfish in there too, they are being destroyed by development. How does that work? When we overdevelop coastal areas and we add to the runoff, and then we dig more wells, and then we pull the saltwater cone up higher to the wells by overdrawing the aquifers, we're mixing in waters that should not be mixed together right along the coast, and then repumping that salt back in, so it actually enriches the salt content of the near coastal water, which is bad. So I think that's all I'm going to say about this. Here are some pictures that I just put up there. They're interesting. These particular Japanese fishing boats in Cape Town Harbor were They're Japanese fishing boats. They were not supposed to be where they were, and they were towed in. It's not Japan necessarily that is the only bad guy. Everybody does this. There are rogue actors of every country. Yes.
Is there a governing body for all of the oceans, like the United Nations
Of oceans? What a great idea. The problem is these people do not, if there's lawlessness everywhere. So if we embrace the rule of law as a way for people to live together in a community of Homo sapiens, that's great. But the problem is there are always a few people who decide to embrace the rule of greed instead of the rule of law, and that's the problem. The international conventions by which we are supposed to safeguard environments like the oceans, like Antarctica, and other places that are treaty governed, are only governed insofar as people respect those treaties, and that's a problem. Pesky humans. All right. This is a real problem. First of all, it's gotten a lot of press lately, how there are microplastics everywhere. That's because people love saran wrap. We love single-use plastic bottles. We buy giant bags of frozen vegetables in Costco. We use so much plastic for everything. It looks like it doesn't degrade and it's robust, which is why a lot of us use composite decking, or we use plastic banisters and rails and things like that for our homes. And the problem is plastic isn't that robust. It's just that the way it weathers is not visible to us on that same time constant or at that same size of particle that we can easily see it. So we end up with not only visible plastics, but not visible plastics in the water column and also sitting in the ocean bed. And the problem with all that plastic is little fish eat tiny plastic, bigger fish eat the fish who ate that tiny plastic, plus bigger chunks of plastic. We are getting plastic everywhere, and then we're eating it, either in the fish, or from our water bottles, or from our packages of frozen broccoli, or from whatever. It's everywhere, and it's harming us, and we find it in our bloodstreams now. Nanoparticles of plastic. Can you see my mouse if I do this? Can you see it? Nod on Zoom if you can see it.
I don't think they can.
Oh, yeah, he says they can. Thank you. All right, this thing here, that's all a big bunch of garbage in the middle of the ocean. This picture here, that's a sea turtle holding a delicious treat of plastic. This is plastic that washes ashore and then creates another source of impact on the environment because birds could eat it and other sea-dwelling organisms could ingest it. So I want to talk about this big collection of garbage here. It's so big and so profound that it has a name. It's not a nice name. It's the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. But we don't want to be Pacific bashing, so we're going to come clean and say that there are 5 major garbage patches that we have identified in the oceans worldwide. Isn't that depressing? And these 5 major patches, look at what number 1 is. See that great big one? Okay, that is the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, because it's the largest of all of those, and it's the one that most affects the US because of ocean currents. And so you can get there by launching yourself from California and going to visit it. And it is humongous. It is described as being about the size of 2 of Texas. It's big. But wait, there's more. another interesting tidbit about my life is when I was a television engineer and producer, I helped work on those Ginsu knife commercials. But wait, there's more. Sometimes you gotta do stuff to stay on.
Do they just float in the ocean or?
Yep, and
Yes, and
we're just getting ready to show you the there's more part of the, but wait, there's more.
Oh, okay.
So yes, it just floats in the ocean, but not just on the surface of the ocean. It also exists at depth. So if you look at this cartoon, here's the part that's exposed. This is not exactly to scale, but it's to give you the idea. Otherwise, this sailing vessel would be 2 times the size of the state of Texas. But just to show you in the general sense, look how much more is beneath the surface than there is above the surface. The reason why it's important to understand that is because it's not like an oil slick that you could put a ring of buoys around it and mush it in together and then scoop it up. You can't scoop it up because most of it goes down so deep. So you see the problem.
What are mesoplastics?
Okay, this is the fancy sciencey way of saying tiny plastic, middle-sized plastic, and bigger plastic. And the reason why they say that is to show you that it affects life at all different sizes. And so these microplastics and even nanoplastics get ingested by things like plankton. And they also, if you have enough stuff distributed near the surface, it affects the primary productivity of the ocean, upon which all the other life depends in the ocean. So it's a big problem. So most of it, if you see this big 53%, I don't know if you can see this very well, is what they're calling megaplastic. That's like big, giant stuff, and almost 50% of that is discarded fishing gear. So the people who depend upon the oceans for their living are dumping their trash in the ocean. Does this make sense? No. This thing is well, it's not quite 1 million miles. I made the kids look at how big it was in kilometers because they were taking science class and I wanted them to use international units. But it's 994 million square miles of stuff. Isn't that
on the surface.
Thanks to you.
Which is the ocean cleanup project, the Dutch kid, well, he's an adult now. Is that doing anything?
Yes, so all of these slides I'm showing you now about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch are materials, educational materials that theoceancleanup.com has made available. And so I put that URL at the bottom of these slides to say, if you want to know more, go look at their website and look at this stuff. And they'll talk about the scientific basis from which they have made this assessment of the distribution of sizes of the plastic and the research they're doing on how to deal with these garbage patches. Yeah.
Question.
Yes, go ahead.
Why did it accumulate to this patch?
Because we're pigs and we just.
No, I
Why
understand.
does it stay there and not get dispersed?
Yeah,
Do you have a theory?
no, I have a question.
Because of the ocean circulation. And so they operate like gyres. Let me see if I can go back up again. So they rotate because of the general movements and the atmospheric movement as well, which is a reflection of how we form storms as well. And so the superficial waters will move in these patterns. And so if you look, all the ones, you see the ones in the southern hemisphere are going counterclockwise and the ones in the northern hemisphere are going clockwise. So it's a function of that. And it's good that they accumulate because that helps us. That doesn't mean there isn't garbage that is a little bit more dispersed because it just escapes the gyre, but if you can say there's a blessing associated with this, it is that it does accumulate so that perhaps it could be mitigated at least in some spatially discrete way? 80,000 tons of garbage, 1.8 trillion pieces of plastic. 99% of everything in the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, plastic. Next time you have an opportunity to buy your vegetables in bulk, do so. Okay, this cartoon just shows you how the effects on life take place, and most of it is intuitive. So the little tinier bits of plastic ingested by smaller organisms, which are then eaten by bigger organisms and are eaten by even bigger organisms, and we eat all of it. We're less discriminating. And then creatures that are not ocean dwelling will also eat those organisms that are. And so the effects of the plastic go everywhere. Yeah.
We have a question on Zoom. Yeah, Ben Williamson.
I see him. Can you tell me the question?
He didn't tell me. Ask him to.
Oh, Ben, can you unmute yourself and ask your question?
He just typed a question.
Oh, you're typing it? Okay. Oh, no, it's already answered. Okay. And I was wondering what kind of guitars you were hiding there since I could only see half of it. Okay, so the question is answered. So you get this accumulation of this material in organisms because ingesting it. And so that's bad. So I wrote down some things here to give you some more details on the impact on wildlife. First of all, it said that 900 different species have been identified that contain plastic somewhere within their bodies. This is just horrifying. 92% of those who have encountered marine debris, it's plastic debris, and 17% of the species that we're talking about here are on the International Union for Conservation of Nature Endangered Species list. So in a positive feedback loop, we're killing them. 180 times more plastic than food is at the surface of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, although it has become almost like a reef in that organisms are taking up home there, and in particular filter feeders, so that who knows what they're feeding on because of all the microplastics. 84% of the plastic that has been found contributing to the pollution on sensitive marine atolls and also around Oahu have been shown to be toxic plastics. And that is a problem because persistent bioaccumulative toxins have an untold number of effects. We only know some of them. There are neurotoxins, there are carcinogenic toxins that are associated with plastic. So we really need to ramp up our understanding of the effects of plastic biologically, not just on us, but on the food that we consume. Because it's more than just about what we eat. It's about disturbing the entire ocean habitat, both at shallow depth and the like. So I want to talk about impacts on humans, and since we love money, we've got to talk about the effects on the economy. First of all, plastic pollution costs. The conservative number I got a few numbers, so I took the more conservative one. $13 billion a year. I already told you about the effect on the food chain just a moment ago. One study that was done with the company Deloitte said the yearly economic costs due to marine plastic pollution are estimated to be between 6 and 19 billion US dollars. That's yearly. And that's from impacts on all sorts of industries, not just fisheries, but also tourism and cleanups and the like. So it becomes important to think about what are the mitigations that we could do before the plastic gets to the ocean. It does no good to only clean up the ocean if we're continually putting more stuff into it. And so it's not just the plastic. There are chemical pollutants that we dump into the ocean. A lot of that has to do with our terrestrial agriculture. And so everywhere you look, there are effects of human industry, chemical effects, mechanical effects, and solid toxins like plastics that persist. So we have to be very mindful of what it's doing. I don't know how many scuba divers we have here, but if you have ever encountered a sea turtle in the ocean, they are amazing creatures. One time I was diving in the Sea of Cortez, which is between the California Baja and Mexico, and we went on a night dive, and I thought it would be fun to just sit on the floor where we were. It was a shallow part. Actually, the Sea of Cortez is quite deep in the Guaymas Basin, but I was closer to the coast of Mexico. So I'm sitting there in my gear, and I have a little light on, which we always do when we night dive. And while I'm sitting there, I see this shadow coming, and this sea turtle approaches me, comes right up, and just bonks me right in my mask with his nose, and then just went away. It just came to say hi. I don't know how it was a he, but I just always refer to him that way. They are amazing. I can't even describe how much loss it would be if we no longer had sea turtles. So now I'm gonna change the temperature a little bit in our ocean discussion. I want to talk about how I got interested in this. So I, as you already heard, have been mostly associated with space exploration. But the thing is, sometimes being in the right place at the right time gives you a serendipitous opportunity to do something different. And I used to work at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in California, which is situated near where a lot of movies get made. And so the director and producer, James Cameron, came to the lab and he said, I'm prototyping a new technology for a film I plan to make later on. And so I thought a good way to do it is to do an educational film so that we could get funding to do this experiment. And if you can think of a science experiment you'd want to do in the deep ocean, and you have an instrument that you might want to try out, we'll take you with us. So I went to the management of the lab and I said, could you please give me $500,000 so we could develop an ocean-going version of an instrument that we were already developing for Mars exploration, which by the way is now on Mars. And I had to present, and what I told the kids this morning is that years of campaigning to my parents for which thing I wanted for Christmas prepared me for campaigning for dollars to build this instrument. And they gave us the money, and it was quite a different thing than preparing for space, because the high pressure environment at the ocean bottom requires very precise technology. The pressures are so extreme that the risk of implosion not only could ruin your instrument, but could then create bad effects on the submersible in which the humans are and kill us all. And that was viscerally brought home by that horrific implosion of the Titan Deep Sea Explorer, which was a stupid design. And the reason it was a stupid design is because I guess they looked at deep sea submersibles like Alvin and like this one, which is a Russian submersible named Mir, and thought, oh, okay, that looks like, you know, the canonical yellow submarine that they always draw when you see cartoons of, you know. So the problem is that's not what this is. That part is a shell through which water flows. The actual real structure is a sphere. And that's what you need to be to go really deep. And the other thing you need to be is a type of material, not that's rigid and strong, but one that has a compressibility that will not crack. And that's part of the problem of what went wrong with Titan. So not only did we have to get the $500,000 to build the instrument and test it and design it right, the problem is James Cameron used to rent space and time on a Russian oceanographic vessel with the Russian deep sea submersibles. And NASA, however much we might share collaboration with the International Space Station, was not keen on us bringing new technology and human assets to do that. So we had to thoroughly make our case to a whole number of people to make this happen. But we pulled it off in terms of getting permission. And then came the hard work of designing something that could not be a sphere, but that also would not implode. The kind of technology that I use in my work takes advantage of a laser that excites a material, and when it interacts with the atoms in the material, or the bonds between the atoms, light reflected back has changed its color very, very little bit. And that tiny little amount of shift can be measured. And then what happens is all the chemical bond types create a little shift in color, and it appears like peaks on a spectrum. And that's how you know what the mineral is if it's a crystal, or what the molecule is if it's something like an amino acid or one of the things that makes up a living thing. And so that requires a tube that's oblong and lenses through which the laser can pass, and then other little windows to collect the light that's reflected back that's slightly different colors. And all of this has to not implode on itself. And so we kept testing our design. The nuts and bolts part of the instrument inside it, but were robust. But the shell, the little windows, and the big tube were very difficult to test because we kept cracking the windows, and we had to design them just so that the pressure would push them into their seat and be very, very smooth inside that seat so they wouldn't crack, and then admit water into the thing, let the thing implode, and it was very close to the edge of the submarine in which we were sitting. So after a lot of failures and then testing to twice the pressure that we would experience in the submarine, we finally had a workable model. And unfortunately, we had to embark from Acapulco. But sadly, instead of going into the tiki bar or the swimming pool or the ocean itself, we were in the hotel doing last-minute fixes to our software. We were not getting to do this. We were doing this. I'm holding my head there because we had a software problem. And then this part here, this is Roa and, I think Edgar. And they were, this was their room, and they were working on the software all night so that the next day, our little control tablets would function. And then we got on the Akademik Keldysh, which is the Russian oceanographic research expedition. They had taken to renting out their vessel because they didn't have enough money from the government to continue their research. So this Australian guy figured out that he could harness this, charge people for tourism, and take them down to the ocean bottom. And at the same time, charge Hollywood a giant fee for being able to use this. This is the ship they used when they shot Titanic also. So we got to be part of this expedition, and the science experiment we wanted to know is, we went to deep sea hydrothermal vents, which are these fissures that are in the ocean floor, through which hot gases, hot water, and dust fly up. And as soon as it hits the cold ocean water, which is about 2.5 degrees centigrade, it crystallizes. and it falls down on the ground, and then it builds up on itself, and it makes these chimneys that are called black smokers. I wanted to see two things with our instrument. The first is to look at the distribution of light, if there was any, from right at the mouth of the chimney, as you get more distal from that heat source, and to see how quickly the light dies off in order to understand how close you have to be to the source of energy that might sustain an ecosystem. The second thing I wanted to see is, it had always been postulated that there might be some source of light in the ocean bottom that was visible, or maybe at least infrared. We know that's visible because that's heat. Got to turn this on. And so that was something that we would be able to see with my instrument, because it could see ultraviolet light all the way into the deep red colors of visible light. So the hypothesis was we would be able to observe that light, and the secondary hypothesis was that we would also be able to see some life down there and figure out its distribution. So there we went. We dove 4 times. Our instrument, this is it, the tube, and it was strapped onto the little grippy arms of the deep sea submersible. This thing here was the IMAX camera, and then you had these big lights because it's pitch black down there, you can't see anything. And then, this is me and my friend Lonnie, who is now in heaven, or at least I think that's where he went. And we went down and our instrument worked. We got great data, and that was our giant expedition. Now, what I want to say is, oh yes,
I'm gonna wait, I'll share it with you when you finish
Okay.
your story.
So these kinds of things are very dangerous. We tried to get as close as we could to the hydrothermal vent. The reason why is because even though we were using a wavelength of laser light to excite the materials to vibrate and tell us what they were, you can't just propagate light endlessly, even a laser, because the water absorbs some. Ultraviolet light travels really well in water, and so there's only one company in the world that made an ultraviolet light laser at that time. Now we have some others, but they're either really, really huge or really, really weak. So because we had a relationship with the man who had invented this, we were able to use that wavelength of light and look at biofilms on the side of the chimney. We got a little too close a couple of times, and the little JPL logo right here, it was just a sticker I stuck on it. When we came back up, it was singed, which was kind of scary.
They get hot too, don't they?
Yeah, they're very hot, boiling.
That's why I thought you would be on that, and
I wanted to show you this little guy here. This is one of 2 autonomous underwater vehicles that were designed and built by Mike Cameron, James Cameron's brother. And their names are Jake and Elwood. And we had 2 submarines that we would take down together, and Jake and Elwood were in one, and our instrument was on the other. One of the times I went down with Mike in the submarine that had Jake and Elwood, and he let me drive because he had been training me for a couple of months, not only how to fly a helicopter, but how to fly Jake and Elwood, because we used a joystick and used basically helicopter functions. The same ways that we would do the trim of a rotary aircraft, we used on these little swimming boxes. And they also had little grippy arms where they could get samples of things. So it was a good way to bring back samples. We also had a big net type of a thing on the articulator arm, where the camera was, just like a net you could drag and grab rocks and such. So we conducted our research, we got our results, we were able to publish. We did see this radiation in the blue, not very, very observable. It's called Cherenkov radiation. that was really cool. We are not the only people who have observed this, so it was not that novel, but I wanted to see if we could see it with our instrument. So this is some of the diversity of life we found down there. You think about the crushing pressures and how we would die in just a blink of an eye. But then look at these things. What a bad design to have like this squishy octopus thing. And what a weird design to have eyes when there's no light, essentially. I mean, who thought of that? And then there are things that look familiar, like deep water crabs and starfish. And you look at all this stuff and you go, how does it not get smushed? But yet it does, and that has to do with the internalized pressure and also the flow and release of pressure and so forth. These, the crabby type guys, the echinoderms here, the fish, this is brine shrimp. It's just a real close-up, so it looks a lot bigger than it was. And this, look at this cute little guy. Adorable. And then these are very alien. They're called tube worms. It's hard to see. You can see that red color there. Looks sort of like a tube of lipstick with this at the end. They're called tube worms, and they're filter feeders. So as the hot water hits the cold water, this temperature differential like circulates the water around, and they survive that way. They're really cool looking. They're about from, say, 6 inches long all the way up to slightly more than a foot, like 14, 15 inches long. Yeah.
Isn't that where Nemo had his home?
Nemo, yes. Yes, don't go and watch any ocean cartoon movies if you know anything about pressure because it's
Last frame, the picture on the right looks like an underwater
volcano.
Volcano eruption. What is that exactly?
That is what is called a black smoker. And the reason why it has that cone shape like a volcano, see, a volcano has not only hot gases, but it also has actual molten rock as well. This is not a volcano. This is just a hot spot that has the gas and potentially dust and also water. And so a hydrothermal vent is something that has hot fluid as well. And not that you can't have some fluid in a volcano, and you can have underwater volcanoes, but this is not that.
Are there a lot of them?
There are a lot of these. There are a few off the coast of California, which you could, they're about at 100 feet, so you could actually dive and scuba to those. And there are many in the Atlantic, and there are many in the Pacific. So we actually went to Guaymas Basin in the Sea of Cortez, not on the same time I was diving, but we also went in the Pacific Ocean. The East Pacific Rise has a lot of hydrothermal vents. And then there's a big area in the Atlantic called Lost City, and there are others elsewhere too. But this is where material from the subsurface comes up, and then just like the way we would make, you know how in caves you have stalagmites and stalactites? It's the material precipitates on the side. In a cave, it's precipitating out of water, and this is sort of precipitating into water coming out of this smoker vent. And we call them black smokers because the dusts look black as they're coming out, but when you see these shiny things on the side, those are the crystals of new minerals forming on the side of the chimney. Yeah.
What are we learning about the Hunga Tonga eruption that occurred a couple of years ago? We don't see much about that in the news. An eruption near Fiji or Tonga?
So the thing is, we know a lot more about volcanology than we do about hydrothermal venting. And so we have many undersea volcanic eruptions, and that's how we get all these islands. And so what we can learn is by looking at the type of material that gets left when the island forms and makes the basalts, we can see the different sources of magma and understand the variety of magma types that are still down there. And so they tell us a lot about the diversity of magmas and what concentration of minerals, and particularly the metal cation that goes into minerals, might be there. And so they give us some sense of what sorts of mineral resources we might learn from volcanic sources, but also what types of combinations of chemistry might be expended as the Earth has evolved, and how evolved we are in our chemical complexity.
And I had a question on chat about 15 minutes ago, and I was waiting for you to finish your story.
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. I told him. This is also from Van Williamson. Diving next week in Bonaire, they established a huge marine park years ago surrounding the whole island. No commercial fishing, no taking of marine life by divers, etc. I see this happening in a few, all capital, other places, but not enough to stop the trend of declining species all over. What can reverse this coming ocean apocalypse, if anything?
Yeah, so Van Bonaire is like one of the best places to go if you're a diver, at least on this coast, or I would say even if you're on the other coast. And the thing is, it is the same way that we protect habitat in terrestrial locations too, by making parks with certain rules. You cannot do this, you cannot do that. If you are already a diver, you know you should not touch coral and leave your oils and such. But the problem in particular with Bonaire, which is I think 52 miles from the coast of Venezuela, Venezuela is one of the places where a lot of dark vessels situate themselves, and as they get closer, it's hard to understand whether or not the protections in place at Bonaire will be violated just because of ocean currents. So some of the things we can do, for example, in a place like Bonaire, is we can think about how we limit the use of pollution-causing garbage in the hospitality industry. And that has happened in large measure, but in other places, particularly with fragile reef structures, like the Great Barrier Reef is one of them, we see encroaching garbage and other kinds of pollution diminishing the diversity of the marine life that are there. So without legislative remedies, it will be difficult to control this. And without appropriate education so that people will understand that we're messing with our own food chain, it will be difficult to interrupt. And the reason why I paint a grim picture here is because of what has happened with respect to the generation of things like chlorofluorocarbons into the atmosphere, and other pollutants that are creating birth defects and a reduction in biodiversity in terrestrial environments. So we can hope for legislative remedy. We can educate people to use less plastic material. We can try more diligently to use more biologically friendly amendments to soil in our pursuit of agricultural activities, but your guess is as good as mine about how effective they will be. Suggestions for organizations that are doing the best work with our donations. That's a really great question. First of all, theoceancleanup.org I really like, and they are the source of the slides. I think it's their .com actually, let me just see. Yeah, theoceancleanup.com. They work together with some other ones, and then there's a number of smaller ones that do things like recycle ocean plastics. It's a cool idea to get those 4 ocean bracelets, but honestly, I don't know how effective they are or are not. I think the best way to help is not necessarily with these organizations that are trying to do mitigations actually in situ, but to reduce the production and use of plastics by humans, and also to come up with better ways to capture single-use plastics and multi-use plastics so that they can be recycled in such a way that we're not generating more pollutants from the recycling of the plastic than are able to harm us with the solid version of them, many of which are volatile species that are equally toxic. So reduce the use and try to figure out how to reuse and repurpose in such a way that will not emit more toxicity into the environment. As far as lists of organizations, that is not something that I know. I don't have much expertise on that ranking. It's sort of like when you're asked to contribute to the combined federal campaign once a year, you have to look beyond the combined federal campaign and look at each charitable organization to see what percentage of your donated funding actually serves its purpose. So not a very definitive answer, but that's the best I got.
You said he supports the Ocean Conservancy too?
The Ocean Conservancy.
Thank you.
Hey, am I gonna?
Yeah, please.
I have a place at the coast, and there's a big, robust conversation going on about windmills generating power offshore. The sports fishermen say that it gives off some kind of well, first off, they're checking the bottom, so they're using, some kind of machine that totally is ruining the fishing around there, and the migration of south of fish. Is there any truth either way to that? I mean, it seems like they try, they go along, and then they get knocked out right at the last. It's become an issue because if you're going to be generating electricity passively, they're using up farmland with faster than we're producing food, and as an issue, and so they're looking to the oceans for this now. Is there an environmental impact on the ocean from windmill?
Can you repeat that? Yes, I'm going to do that. So what we're talking about here is wind turbines and other offshore energy generation. So it's more than just wind turbines, it's other kinds as well. And the short answer is they do disturb the ocean habitat. There's no two ways about it, in a number of ways, depending upon which type of offshore energy generation it is. And even though something like wind seems benign, there are several new pollution pathways and also the biological disturbances that you get from disturbing fish habitat. And this is a huge problem. And so when you're seeking, I guess what we would call greener energy solutions, it has to be a comprehensive approach that asks the question, what is the least harmful way I can use this new technology without generating more harm? So the obvious answer is to have enough surface tiles that are either photovoltaic or can, in some other sense, be useful for green energy generation on land that has already been made impervious by the positioning of a building on it or the positioning of a parking structure on it, and then place those kinds of wind turbines or photovoltaics or take your pick there. The problem is you're exactly right when you say we can't just claim open land that is agricultural land and put stuff there and then still not have a way to generate food. That is true. Nor can you tolerate the industrial waste of these things because they still have ways of disrupting the soil, the regolith, and the bedrock beneath them. You have all kinds of ways that you're disrupting the near surface atmosphere area, which impacts birds. And then you have also the impact on insects because the relationship and the system between birds and insects is a profound one, not to mention that in turn can, sorry?
Sorry. I was thinking vibration, didn't mean to say it out loud.
Yeah, vibration is an impact, but what I was going to say is it's not just birds and insects, it's the plants for which you need the insects to pollinate. So you get a whole systemic effect there's something else too, and we talked about that just briefly right now, when Trina mentioned about vibration. And so the problem is there's also acoustic pollution and there's light pollution. And almost all physical objects that are placed offshore have some kind of lighting. And that's so you can see it. And light pollution also affects migratory patterns. So all these things interact in a system, and you have to take a systems approach to solving the problem. You cannot just do a thing, you have to do maybe 6 things at the same time. Yes.
I guess, the issue for me is more on the plastic side, and what's being actually dumped into the oceans on this side. I mean, for me, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, what can I do? Is there something I can do personally to try to help? At the same breath, it seems to me that I think there should be some way of us to be able to control it somehow. To say, hey, this plastic here we can use and use it for 2 months and it dissolves away. Okay, but I'm seeing plastic that's been around forever. And what does it take to get rid of that stuff other than what do you burn it and bury it?
Okay, so Zoom people, we're talking about plastic and what individuals can do to affect this problem of plastics getting dumped into the ocean. So there are things that we can do. First of all, just use less of it, which is easier said than done. It's what I said about vegetables. Buy vegetables in bulk where you can. Do not buy them in a big plastic bag. Sometimes you can just pick up the head of broccoli or cauliflower naked. And sometimes you can pick up ears of corn naked and potatoes naked. Some things you can't pick up naked because they always stick them in a plastic bag. But don't use those. Use the things that aren't.
You could buy them on Amazon, the reusable net bags for produce.
You can buy reusable net bags, but just chuck them in any bag that you have. But the idea is just don't use plastic, make a commitment to that.
I'm sorry, but I still think the issue is kind of like getting the
So
teaching out.
let me finish, because
Okay,
you
sorry.
gotta let me answer the question you asked. So that's one thing you can do. The problem with plastic is that it is a multi-legged animal. And a lot of the plastic, it is, as I said, discarded fishing gear that people dump overside of their boats. And as we said also, a lot of those boats are illegal. How we enforce that? I don't know, because we can't find them all. So that AI approach will help to find some of those to monitor the oceans better. But the amount of plastic that gets into the waterways, because we use landfills to a huge extent, and that water goes then into the water table, goes into the streams, goes into the rivers, and they empty into the ocean. So even though you might live in Nebraska or Iowa, that bag of vegetables is going to go into a landfill somewhere, end up in a river, and then end up in the ocean. So it is not nothing to say, don't buy things in plastic. The second thing is when you buy other stuff. If your kid or your grandkid wants a certain toy that is packaged all in plastic, take a look at that. I get it that there's peer pressure to have the latest thing, which is made of plastic, but it is a commitment. It is a complete amendment of life to just stop using so much plastic. There is no other way. There isn't an easy answer to this except to stop making it economically useful to some conglomerate that just wants the quick buck.
The class folks might be interested to know that early in March, we have a course coming up with 2 scientists from Horn Point talking about life in the dead zone. So you might want to go back on the Chesapeake Forum website and go find that and take that class.
And their respective specialties are zooplankton. One of them in particular is his specialty is the impact of microplastics on zooplankton here in the bay.
5 minutes.
I know, because you gave me this handy little book.
We have a question.
Yes.
Oh, also, these neonics, Bayer is a very bad thing. I mean, Bayer needs to have pressure put on. these neonics that are affecting the bees. If we lose our bees or our pollinators, what do we do then?
First of all, I don't know this term neotic.
It is a term that they use, and it's the type of thing that where you've got these pollinators, which are extremely important. I mean, we can't go.
Yeah, but what does the word mean?
Well, can you spell it? It's Neonics, neonics. Neonics. I've just been reading about it, and it has to do with
It's a
the pollinators.
insecticide. It's a class of
Oh, it's a
synthetic
class of
neurotoxic insecticide.
Okay, next.
Right.
Yeah, and Bayer is one of the main things that's making it. And there's a pressure on Bayer to stop all this so that the bees can do their work and pollinate food. So it happens.
So the way to put pressure on somebody is not to use their product. When you have a big multinational conglomerate, it's harder to put pressure on them because it seems like your one choice not to buy their product. The problem then is, are you willing to be an advocate? And it is a tough problem. I can't say that I know much about what one can do in that regard because I don't work in that field. But what I can say is I have decided to be very strict about what I will buy or not buy and what my family will or will not buy. And I tell everybody about it. So instead of posting a picture of one's dinner on Facebook, post your opinion about this. And I think that you get to a place where if you reach this activation energy barrier where enough people think about something because either enough harm has been caused or all of a sudden it just reaches enough awareness, you can make change, but it's very, very slow. What's going to happen if we lose pollinators? Bad things, because we'll lose those plants, as well as those species.
I have a beehive in my backyard. Give me your card.
Yeah, be a beekeeper.
And they have that colony collapse, which is.
Yes, I had my first colony collapsed. And nobody knows why, but we have signs all over our neighborhood.
Not to use
Bee friendly, But industrially, using the bees to go out and farmers will rent bees to, pollinate. And then they use insecticides and people go to, the bee owners go to get their bees and they're gone, they're dead, they're in the field dead. So, I mean, it's a terrible cycle. So my little beehive, it's just, one little thing to do. But you're right, it's hard. It is hard to buy something that's not plastic. Look around. I mean, try to now you can get your detergent in sheets. So you don't have to get those great big.
And they come in a cardboard box.
I go to the supermarket or Costco and I'm appalled that people have their carts loaded up with, bottled water. Well, because we don't have water fountains anymore. You can't find a water fountain. Well, there's one here in this building, there's a couple of old buildings. But, you're right, it's so systemic. It boggles the mind. Where do you start? What can you do?
I place at the beach, my wife and I, the older we get, the less we eat.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Go out to eat and we always get something to carry home, that plastic is like serious plastic. So I was at a trade show there and they were giving out, there's the Prince George's County Police Department. There's a collapsible bowl, like a dog watering bowl. Okay? So when we go out to eat, we take that in my wife's purse for pleasure. And instead of getting this god awful, piece of plastic that is literally reusable, that we have zero plastic. Before we'd open our refrigerator after 5 days and it was up in the gunnels.
Except that the collapsible thing, even though you can reuse it, is still silicone. So it's very aggravating. Paper, a lot of the restaurants are using paper products to send home, but still,
I've got a little titanium set of dishes that were from all my expeditions. But most people don't wanna like
Go through the airport X-ray machine.
So, are there any more Zoom questions? Okay, because we are at a little bit over our closing time, and I wanted to at least not let the Zoom people feel like you can't get a word in. So, you have further words? Something about coral reef bleaching. This is a big problem too because of both higher ocean temperatures and also not only the higher ocean temperatures, but again, the runoff, agricultural runoff, chemically pollutes the coral reefs. So the reefs that had undergone some significant bleaching and die-off, I think it was last year or the year before, it's all kind of blending together now. They had some water recovery, but now they are starting to decline again. So I don't know the answer to that, only that it seems to be more cyclical if it had some significant bleaching associated with more die-off, and then we had a little bit of a rebound, but now it's happening again. I don't know whether that is temperature related or whether it's temperature plus pollution, but certainly both of those are at least to the second order partially anthropogenic. So what that means is we have to examine our approach to mitigating the factors that are causing more accelerated global warming. And again, our plastics and our use of pesticides and fertilizers that are entering the runoff. You're welcome.
Question here.
One positive thing is the state or the government is paying handsomely to farmers to dig ponds. In fact, they'll dig the pond and they'll pay the farmer to have the pond, because the pond really at the right spot can really get rid of a lot of this runoff. And they will pay, the state pays and they'll dig it. So ponds are very important.
They are, but not everybody possesses the right configuration of land to have a runoff or a catchment basin. So,
In this community, it's a requirement when you build, like a commercial building, the planners have set it up where in certain areas with that relief runoff mitigation, they are part of the construction cost.
Yeah, you can see them
Yeah.
around the
Shopping
fast food
centers,
places and
yeah.
stuff.
And it's been fun having you here.